Emma Callahan, a human scientist and former soldier, had been captured during an intergalactic peace mission gone awry. Her fate was now in the hands of the Galactic Council, a collection of beings far older and more advanced than humanity. But that arrogance could not shield them from the storm they were about to unleash. The council members had gathered to discuss her fate in an emergency session, their voices a mixture of indifference and disdain. At the head of a table sat Supreme Governor Saith, an insectoid being with cold, calculating eyes that flickered across the holographic screen before him. His antennae twitched as he read through the reports of Emma's capture, yet his focus seemed distant, as though the life of a human held little meaning in his world. He glanced at the reptilian Lord Xylorin, whose scales gleamed in the chamber's artificial light. "Shall we proceed with the execution?" Saith's voice was smooth, his words dripping with authority. Xylorin, his forked tongue darting between his lips, narrowed his crimson eyes. The human should have been eliminated the moment she trespassed into our territory. But it seems some prefer to prolong the matter. The tone was dismissive, almost bored. To Xylorin, Emma was just another human to be crushed under the weight of galactic power, a mere insect to be squashed. Across the table, Zurin Taller, a being of pure energy and light, hummed softly, his telepathic presence brushing against the minds of those around him. Zurin's form flickered between different patterns of light, his body ever shifting. As a member of the council, his telepathic abilities were unparalleled, and though he said little, his mind was always present, quietly processing the ongoing discussions. "We should not be hasty," Zurin intoned, his voice a blend of thought and sound. "The human has knowledge we might yet need. Perhaps her value lies in what she can offer us, not her death." But Xylorin was quick to dismiss the notion. Knowledge? From a human? Preposterous. Saith, his eyes narrowing, leaned forward. "Xylorin speaks the truth. The time for negotiations is over. She was caught in a prohibited sector, and she was part of a human research team, not an ambassador or dignitary. Her fate is already sealed." Zurin's light flickered, an almost imperceptible signal of discomfort. His voice, a soft ripple through the air, continued, "Yet her capture was not without consequence. If we execute her now, we risk igniting a conflict with humanity. Their military has already shown signs of aggression." "Let them come," Xylorin sneered. "Humans are a primitive species. They would be no match for us. One woman's death will not start a war." The chamber fell silent as the weight of Xylorin's words settled in. Emma was just a single human among billions, an insignificant speck in the grand scheme of things. And yet in that silence something stirred, a sense of foreboding, an unspoken acknowledgement that her death might be the spark that ignited something far greater than any of them anticipated. Emma, for her part, had not been idle during her captivity. Despite the pain, despite the burns searing her skin, her mind remained sharp. She had not been broken. Her body may have been battered, but her will to live and her determination to protect humanity burned hotter than the flames that consumed her. She had done what she could to fight back, to resist, but now all she could do was wait. Every word from the council felt like a death sentence. Every movement of the guards a reminder of the fate that awaited her. But Emma knew something they did not. She was not just a pawn in their game. She was a key to a larger truth. As the council debated her fate, Emma's mind was working. She knew how this would play out. She could already feel it in her bones. They would burn her alive. They would make an example of her to intimidate humanity, to show that the Galactic Council ruled with absolute power. But she would not die in vain. She had one last trick up her sleeve, a signal hidden within her biological systems, a faint trace of a transmission that would reach the only person who could stop this madness. Meanwhile, General David Callahan, commander of the United Earth Forces, was far from the deliberations. He was in his war room, hundreds of light years away, overseeing military strategies designed to protect humanity from any alien incursions. His reputation as a brilliant tactician and ruthless general had earned him the respect of his men and the fear of his enemies. He had built an empire from the ground up, rising through the ranks on the strength of his intellect and his brutal resolve. But there was one thing he could not control: his love for Emma. David had been married to Emma for 6 years, a love that had transcended the chaos of war. She had been his anchor, the one person who had always kept him grounded. When she was sent on the mission, he had kissed her goodbye, unaware that it would be the last time he saw her. Now, weeks later, he had received reports of her capture, but the intel had been scarce, until today. A signal, a faint pulse of human technology, had come through, slipping past the layers of alien security that surrounded the Council's operations. It was Emma's final message, a call for help that reached David's heart and shattered his calm demeanor. He stared at the decoded message, his fingers gripping the edge of the console. Emma's voice, strained and weak, echoed in his mind. "David, they're going to kill me. I'm sorry, The transmission cut off abruptly, but the desperation in her words fueled a fire inside him that no galaxy could extinguish. The decision had been made. The time for diplomacy was over. A deep growl of rage rose in David's throat, his breath quickening as his mind raced. He had always known that humanity's place in the galaxy would be contested. He had known that someday someone would underestimate them, think them weak, think them easy to dominate. And now the Council had made that mistake. They had burned his wife alive, and they had sealed their fate. With a cold precision that only a seasoned general could summon, David began organizing his forces. His fleet, the most powerful humanity had ever assembled, was already on standby. The plan was simple: strike fast, hit hard, and make the Council regret underestimating the humans they had so carelessly dismissed. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon at his disposal would be turned against the Council. And when the dust settled, the galaxy would know one thing: humanity was not to be trifled with. Back in the Council chamber, the debate continued, but the tension had shifted. The decision had already been made. Emma Callahan's life would be extinguished in a way that would ensure the Council's dominance. They were certain of it. But as they made their final preparations, they remained blissfully unaware that their decision was about to set into motion a chain of events that would irrevocably change the galaxy. Emma's fate had been sealed, but so too had theirs. And General David Callahan, the husband of the woman they had thoughtlessly burned, was about to make sure they learned that humanity, though small in the vastness of space, was a force unlike any other. David Callahan's fingers hovered over the console in his war room. The hard metallic surface of the command center felt cool beneath his touch, a stark contrast to the simmering rage that churned inside him. He had seen reports, had heard the rumors, and he had always known there was a threat from the aliens that dominated the galaxy. But he had never imagined this, never imagined that they would go so far as to hurt his wife, Emma. He replayed the message again, her voice so frail, so broken. "David, they're going to kill me." The static that followed the words sent a jolt through his body, but it wasn't the static that he felt. It was the weight of what she had said. "They're going to kill me." That single statement had ignited something within him, something primal and cold. And for the first time in years, General David Callahan felt an emotion he hadn't allowed himself in far too long. Fear. Fear for Emma. He clenched his fists, fighting back the wave of anguish that threatened to overwhelm him. Emma was everything to him. He had met her years ago, during a joint mission between humans and an alien faction who had offered their technological support to Earth. The sparks between them had been immediate. She was brilliant, a scientist who held an unshakable belief in the good of the universe. Where David had once seen nothing but enemies, she had seen potential allies. Her calm demeanor, her quiet strength, had drawn him to her. And over the years, as their bond had deepened, he had come to rely on her for far more than intellectual insights. She had become his anchor. But now she was lost, held by a council of arrogant, ancient beings who did not understand the consequences of their actions. David knew them all too well. The ruthless Lord Xylerin, who cared only for power. The cold, calculating Saith, whose species had long mastered the art of manipulation. And Zurin Taller, the telepathic being who watched from the shadows, playing a game of politics that was far beyond the comprehension of human minds. The Galactic Council had always been a group of self-righteous beings who sought to control the galaxy by force. But this was personal. David hadn't hesitated. He knew what needed to be done, and with that clarity, he sprang into action. His first call was to his most trusted officers, men and women who had fought alongside him in countless campaigns, whose loyalty could not be questioned. They were soldiers, but they were also human beings, and in that moment, David felt a responsibility to each of them, as though their fates were bound to his own. He would lead them into the heart of the storm, and they would follow, because they knew the cost of inaction. The war room hummed with activity as David's orders were relayed across the channels. His fleet, the most advanced military force humanity had ever assembled, was ready for war. For a brief moment, the cool precision of military discipline settled over him, but as he made the final preparations, his thoughts inevitably drifted back to Emma. The last time he had seen her, it had been in their quarters on Earth. The softness of her voice as she spoke about the future, the quiet laughter they shared over meals. He had kissed her forehead as she left for the mission, a farewell that felt like it might have been forever, but he had never entertained the thought that it would be so. They had promised each other a life of peace after the war. Emma had always believed in that promise, always believed that humanity could carve out its place in the galaxy without resorting to violence. And now she was gone, taken by the Council and burned alive in an act of cruelty that no amount of reason could explain. The transmission had come through just in time. His soldiers, his commanders, and his fleet were at the ready. But what haunted him most wasn't the preparation for battle. It was the pain of knowing he had failed her. Back on Zalthira, Emma's screams had stopped. The Council, in their cruel ignorance, had believed they had broken her. They had thought they were merely extinguishing the flame of one insignificant human. But Emma was no ordinary woman, and though they had burned her body, her spirit had not been so easily snuffed out. Though she had suffered beyond what most could fathom, Emma had done what no one expected. In the last moments before her life was stolen, before the fire consumed her completely, she had activated a hidden signal, a faint pulse of human technology embedded deep within her neural implants. It was a failsafe she had designed for just such an occasion, something so minuscule, so subtle, that the Council had never detected it. A signal to David. When the signal reached David, his pulse quickened, the sense of dread giving way to a cold, focused clarity. The transmission was weak, barely a whisper in the void of space, but it was there. His fingers flew over the console as he worked to enhance the signal, using every bit of his knowledge of galactic technology. He listened to the garbled remnants of Emma's voice, piecing together what she had tried to convey. She had known she was going to die, but she had not given up. She had left him with one last chance, a chance for revenge, a chance to destroy the Council that had made such a grievous mistake. David, I'm sorry. Her voice broke through the static, the words barely audible. I've done all I could. They've burned me alive, but I didn't give up. You have to stop them. You have to stop Xylorin. The words settled like a weight in his chest. Emma had survived longer than they thought, fighting even as her body was consumed by fire. She had died with defiance in her heart, and in her final moments, she had made it clear that the Galactic Council was her killer. And now, in that final breath, she had given him the most important gift of all, a purpose. It was no longer about strategy or diplomacy. David had tried for years to avoid full-scale conflict, had spent every waking moment ensuring humanity didn't fall into war. But now it was no longer a choice. The Council had crossed a line. They had attacked his family, and for that they would pay. Humanity would make them pay. The plan was set into motion, but David didn't feel the satisfaction of victory. His emotions were raw, filled with an anguish that only deepened as he prepared his fleet for retaliation. His eyes didn't leave the screen as he activated the next phase of the operation. His orders were direct: annihilate the Council. Strike swiftly, strike with fury. The galaxy would never be the same after this day. In the corridors of the Citadel on Zalthira, the Galactic Council continued its deliberations, unaware of the storm that was about to strike. Xylerin was already savoring the thought of humanity's submission. Saith, ever the strategist, was calculating the political ramifications, and Zurentaler, deep in his own thoughts, remained unreadable, his telepathic presence flickering as he observed the proceedings. But the truth was that the Council was already doomed. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted irrevocably. General David Callahan, humanity's greatest asset, was coming for them. And this time, it would not be diplomacy or negotiation that won the day. This time, it would be vengeance, a burning resolve that could not be extinguished. The Council was already too late. David would make sure they learned the true power of humanity. The ship's engines hummed beneath David Callahan's feet as he stood at the command deck, staring out into the black void of space. His fleet, a massive armada of the most advanced warships humanity had ever constructed, was poised and ready. Every ship, every crew member, every weapon had a singular purpose now: vengeance. The Galactic Council had underestimated him, had killed his wife, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. His fingers drummed against the console in front of him, each tap a reminder of the cold resolve he had adopted the moment Emma's transmission had reached him. The message was burned into his memory, replaying over and over in his mind. Her voice, so weak yet filled with determination, had been his catalyst. Her last breath had lit a fire within him that nothing could extinguish. Not the might of the Council, not the fear of galactic war. David had never been one to rush into conflict, but the lines had been crossed. This wasn't just war, it was personal. General, all systems are green. We are ready to initiate the first wave, came the voice of Colonel Jane Davis, his second in command. A seasoned soldier, Jane was one of the few people David trusted completely. She had fought alongside him in countless battles, and her loyalty had never wavered. But even she could feel the tension in the air today. There was something different in David's demeanor, something colder, harder. He nodded without turning away from the viewport. "Activate the fleet," he commanded. "We hit them hard and fast. Leave nothing standing." With a crisp salute, Davis relayed the orders. David watched as his fleet began to power up, massive warships moving into formation, ready to launch an assault on the heart of the Galactic Council. His mind, however, was already several steps ahead. He had studied every report, every tactical data point available. His fleet was outnumbered, but it didn't matter. The Council had relied too heavily on their strength, their alien technologies, their belief that their power was unchallenged. They had failed to account for one thing: humanity's resolve. As the fleet charged forward, David thought of Emma again. He could still feel her presence, as if she were standing beside him. Her voice echoed in his ears, urging him on. "David, you have to stop them." He had failed her once. He would not fail again. The first wave of ships launched their strike on a vulnerable alien supply station located just beyond the Council's territory. It was a target chosen with precision, an easy mark to test the Council's defenses. David's forces descended on the station without warning, overwhelming the unsuspecting guards. Within minutes, the station was ablaze, a silent signal to the Council that humanity had arrived. From his command ship, the Vanguard, David watched the operation unfold on his screen. The initial success was crucial, but it was only a prelude. The Council had more than just supply stations. They had fortified positions, vast fleets, and the might of their ancient technology. David had prepared for this. He knew the true battle would be fought on Zalthira, the heart of the Council's power, and it would not be won through brute force alone. "Phase 2, David ordered, his voice unwavering. His officers followed the orders without question, already anticipating his next move. The second wave of ships, smaller, more agile, was deployed to disrupt the Council's communication lines and cripple their strategic command. The goal was not to destroy them outright, but to sow confusion, to force them into a state of panic. David wanted them to understand that their power was slipping away. Zurentaler, the telepathic member of the Council, would be the first to feel the effect of this disruption. Zurin's ability to read minds made him one of the Council's greatest assets, but David knew that even someone as powerful as Zurin had weaknesses. One of those weaknesses was the inability to anticipate human strategy. Zern's telepathy had no defense against unpredictability. That was what David excelled at, thinking outside the parameters that alien species had set for themselves. As David watched his ships carry out their orders, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Council had to know they were under attack by now. The information on their defensive capabilities had been meticulously analyzed, but there was still a nagging sense that they were missing something. The Council's response had been slow, almost too slow. The Vanguard sensors picked up something unexpected. An alien fleet, vast and ominous, materialized from the nearby nebula. They had been waiting for David to make the first move. They had anticipated his strategy and had laid a trap. The Council had been biding their time, letting David waste resources, knowing that his fleet would eventually run out of steam. David's heart raced, but his face remained unreadable. The battle had changed in an instant, but that was the way of war. He didn't flinch. He never did. Instead, he issued his orders with unyielding precision. Bring the fleet to full combat readiness. Target the enemy flagship. Fire on my mark. The battle erupted around them. Explosions filled the void as missiles, laser beams, and plasma bolts tore through space, the flashing lights illuminating the battlefield. His fleet, though smaller, fought with a ferocity that the Council had not anticipated. David's ships were faster, more maneuverable, and his crews fought with a purpose that transcended simple military doctrine. Every shot fired, every move made, was for Emma. They fought for revenge, for honor, for the future of humanity. It was something that the alien races could never fully comprehend. On the Vanguard, David's hands were steady as he directed his forces, his mind calculating every move with the precision of a surgeon. His tactical brilliance was on full display. Within minutes, the tide of the battle shifted. The Council's flagship, a massive vessel adorned with alien technology, began to falter under the relentless barrage from David's fleet. The shields flickered, then failed. The alien ship was vulnerable. Fire, David ordered. The main cannon of the Vanguard discharged in a blinding flash of light, sending a massive surge of energy toward the Council's flagship. The alien ship tried to evade, but it was too slow. The shot landed with devastating accuracy, tearing through the hull and igniting a series of catastrophic explosions. Within seconds, the flagship was crippled, its power grid failing, and its crew scrambling to restore order. But David wasn't finished. He could see it on his screen. Zern, the telepathic member of the Council, was already coordinating a retreat. The telepath's mind had likely felt the shift in the battle. He could sense the panic among the Council's leadership, and David would use that to his advantage. "Prepare the boarding party," David said, his voice low and dangerous. The time for subtlety had passed. It was time to end this. As his crew scrambled to follow his command, David's mind was focused entirely on the task at hand. Zern had been a thorn in humanity's side for too long, and now it was time to remove him. David had never been a man who relished killing, but this was different. This was personal. He wasn't just avenging Emma, he was sending a message. The Vanguard was now in striking distance of the crippled flagship. A small, elite boarding party was dispatched, their goal to infiltrate the Council's command center and capture Zern. They moved quickly, silently, as they breached the enemy ship's outer defenses. The corridors of the alien vessel were alien in both design and atmosphere, cold, metallic, and void of life. But David's soldiers moved with the precision of ghosts. Inside the Council ship's command room, Zern stood at the center, his eyes glowing faintly as he probed the minds of the few surviving officers. He was preparing for the inevitable. But David was already one step ahead. The telepath could sense David's presence, but it was too late to stop him. The doors to the command room burst open, and David strode in, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. Zern's telepathic presence pushed against his mind, but David had trained himself for moments like this. He had learned to shut out the noise, to ignore the pressure of foreign minds intruding on his thoughts. "Your council is finished," David said, his voice a whisper of finality. Zern's eyes flickered with something. Was it fear? No matter. The end had come. The war for humanity's future had begun, and this battle was David's to win. The battle for Zalthira had reached its zenith. The council's once unassailable citadel now lay in ruins, the debris of shattered ships and burning fragments scattered across the stars. David Callahan stood at the helm of the vanguard, his hands gripping the console with a firm determination that mirrored the cold resolve in his heart. His fleet had shattered the council's defenses, crippled their ships, and destroyed their central command. But the final step remained. The council's leadership, the beings responsible for Emma's death, had to be eradicated. Inside the citadel's core, amidst the broken hallways and now distant echoes of command, the last members of the Galactic Council were making their final stand. Lord Xylorin, the reptilian tyrant who had relished in Emma's suffering, was retreating to the central chamber, flanked by the remnants of his elite guards. Supreme Governor Saith, ever the strategist, was already calculating their escape, his insectoid mind constantly scheming for a way out. But the one David had come for, the one who had orchestrated the brutality in the shadows, stood unflinching in the heart of the citadel, Zurin Talar. The telepathic being had sensed David's approach long before the vanguard had entered Zalthira's atmosphere. His mind, capable of reading thoughts with terrifying precision, had felt the wave of rage, of vengeance, that poured from David. Zurin had always prided himself on his ability to foresee the future, to bend others to his will through his mental prowess. But he had underestimated humanity. He had underestimated David Callahan. As David's boots echoed in the hollow hallways of the citadel, he felt the weight of the journey. He had fought through countless battles to reach this moment, through bloodshed and sacrifice. He had lost so much. His soldiers had followed him not just because of his tactical brilliance, but because of his vision for a future where humanity could stand on equal footing with the galaxy's most powerful races. But Emma had changed everything. Now, his vision was one of vengeance, pure, relentless, and without mercy. With every step, his mind recalled the faces of his men, his fallen comrades, and above all, Emma's face. The way she had smiled at him before her mission, the way her voice had always steadied him. That smile had been snuffed out in the flames of the council's cruelty. And now, as he moved deeper into the citadel, he realized that it wasn't just about Emma. It was about humanity. This was the moment when the galaxy would learn that humans were not to be controlled, not to be manipulated. They were not the weak, helpless species that the council had assumed them to be. David was about to show them the true power of humanity. He reached the central chamber, the massive doors looming before him, and paused. Inside, Zurin Talar stood alone, his glowing form flickering with the faint remnants of energy that flowed through his body. The telepath's eyes, bright with an inner light, fixed on David as he entered. There was no surprise, no fear, only a calm acceptance. Zurin had known this moment would come. "You're too late, General Callahan." Zurin's voice echoed through the room, his thoughts reverberating in David's mind like a deep, haunting hum. "The council is finished, but humanity will never rise. You're no different from the other races. You think you can challenge us, but your time will come to an end, just as all things do." David's lips twisted into a grim smile. "You're wrong, Zurin. This isn't about power. This is about justice. This is about my wife." Zurin's mind recoiled slightly at the mention of Emma. He had not expected the raw emotion that radiated from David, the weight of grief and rage so palpable that it felt like a physical force. Zurin had always prided himself on understanding others, on bending their wills to his telepathic influence. But this was something different. This was something he could not control. "You think you can destroy me? You think you can win this war?" Zurin's voice was both a question and a command, his mind probing deeper into David's consciousness, seeking weakness, seeking fear. But David had no fear. He had come here not to beg for mercy, not to plead for the future of his species. He had come to end the council's reign of terror. He reached for his blade, the hilt cold beneath his fingers, and stepped forward. "No, Zurin, I'm not here to beg. I'm here to kill you." With a sudden, fluid motion, David lunged. The blade cut through the air with a speed and precision that only a seasoned warrior like David could wield. Zurin, his mind already shifting and calculating, attempted to block the strike with a mental shield, but David had already anticipated it. His mind, honed by years of combat, moved faster than Zurin's telepathy could adjust. The blade met the telepath's shield with a crack of energy, and for a brief moment, the air in the room shimmered as the two forces clashed. Zurin's energy rippled outward, an attempt to push David back, to bend his will. But David was a force beyond what Zurin could control. With a scream of rage, David pressed forward, his blade cutting through the shield and embedding itself in the telepath's side. Zurin staggered, his form flickering, but his mind remained intact, his consciousness still fighting to regain control. His telepathic power surged, lashing out in a final attempt to break David's resolve. "You cannot win, General. You are human, weak, fragile. You will always be nothing more than a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of the universe." David's voice was low and cold as he pulled his blade free. "Maybe. But that moment is my time, Zurin. And I'm going to make sure it lasts long enough to bury you." With a roar, David lunged again, this time striking with the precision of a man who had seen the worst the universe had to offer. Zurin attempted to shield himself once more, but David was faster. The blade struck true, slicing through the telepath's form, severing his connection to the mental network that had made him a threat for so long. Zurin's body collapsed, his energy flickering and fading as the life drained from him. His mind, so vast and complex, shattered like glass, and David stood over him, breathing heavily. The telepath's final words echoed in his mind, but they were nothing more than empty echoes now. The council was dead. Zurin Taller was gone. David took a long, steadying breath, feeling the weight of the battle slip from his shoulders. The war was over, and humanity had won. But it wasn't the victory he had imagined. It wasn't the triumph he had dreamed of. Emma was still gone, and the galaxy would never be the same. He had avenged her, but the cost had been high. As he stood in the ruined chamber, the aftermath of the battle settling around him, David thought of his soldiers, of the men and women who had fought by his side. He had led them with a fierce sense of purpose, and now, as he gazed out at the stars, he realized that their fight wasn't just for survival. It was for a future where humanity could stand tall, no longer cowering before the alien forces that had sought to crush them. The message was clear. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, but now they would know better. David Callahan had led his people through the fire, and though the flames had scorched him, they had also forged something stronger, a new era for humanity, one built on the ashes of those who had tried to destroy them. The war had ended, but David knew that the story of humanity was just beginning. And in that beginning, there would be no more fear, no more retreat. They had claimed their place in the stars, and nothing would ever take it from them.